The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Fallujah as Marine Sergeant Sarah Martinez adjusted her Kevlar helmet and checked her rifle for the third time. At 24 years old, she had already completed 2 tours in Iraq, but something about this particular patrol felt different. The intelligence reports had been inconsistent, and the local population seemed more nervous than usual. Sarah led a small reconnaissance team through the narrow alleyways of the Al-Anbar province. Her team consisted of 4 other Marines, all experienced soldiers who had learned to trust each other's instincts in the dangerous urban warfare environment of Iraq. The mission was straightforward: investigate reports of insurgent activity in a residential compound and gather intelligence on potential weapons caches. As they moved through the maze-like streets, Sarah noticed the unusual silence. Normally, children would be playing in the courtyards, women would be hanging laundry, and merchants would be setting up their small shops. Today, the streets were eerily empty. She signaled to her team to maintain heightened awareness and reduce their movement speed. The compound they were approaching sat at the intersection of 2 main roads, a strategic location that would allow insurgents to monitor coalition movements. The building was a typical Iraqi structure: concrete walls, flat roof, small windows that provided excellent defensive positions. Sarah's training had taught her to identify potential ambush sites, and this location checked every box on the danger list. Her radio crackled with updates from command. "Recon Team Alpha, this is base. Intelligence suggests possible high-value target in your area. Proceed with extreme caution and report any unusual activity immediately." Sarah acknowledged the transmission and gathered her team for a quick briefing. They would approach the compound from 2 directions, with Sarah and Private Johnson taking the front entrance while the others secured the perimeter. The plan was solid, based on countless similar operations they had executed successfully. As they began their approach, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that preceded dangerous operations. Her senses became hyperacute. She could hear every small sound, smell the dust and diesel fumes in the air, and feel the weight of her equipment with crystal clarity. This heightened state had kept her alive through dozens of dangerous missions. The compound's metal gate was slightly ajar, another red flag that made Sarah pause. In her experience, Iraqi families were careful about security, especially in areas with insurgent activity. An open gate often meant the residents had left quickly or were being used as cover for hostile forces. She peered through the gap in the gate and saw a courtyard with several doorways leading into the main building. Clotheslines hung between concrete posts, and a few plastic chairs suggested recent occupation. But again, no signs of current activity. The silence was becoming more unsettling with each passing minute. Private Johnson, a 19-year-old from Texas who had been with Sarah's unit for 6 months, whispered into his radio to update the perimeter team. His voice was steady despite his young age. Combat had a way of accelerating maturity among soldiers. Sarah appreciated having team members she could rely on completely. They entered the courtyard slowly, weapons ready, using the tactical movements they had practiced hundreds of times. Sarah took point while Johnson covered their rear. Each doorway represented a potential threat, and they cleared them systematically according to their training protocols. The first room appeared to be a living area with traditional Middle Eastern furnishings, cushions on the floor, low tables, and family photographs on simple wooden shelves. Everything looked normal except for the absence of people. Sarah began to suspect they were walking into a carefully prepared trap. As they moved toward the next room, Sarah heard a subtle sound that made her freeze instantly. It was barely perceptible. The soft scrape of fabric against concrete, possibly someone shifting position while trying to remain hidden. She held up her fist to signal Johnson to stop and strained to identify the source of the noise. The sound came from the direction of the stairway leading to the roof. Sarah knew that rooftop positions were favored by insurgent snipers and rocket-propelled grenade teams. She quickly assessed their tactical situation and realized they were in an extremely vulnerable position. The courtyard offered minimal cover, and they were exposed to potential fire from multiple directions. She made a quick decision to investigate the upper level, while Johnson maintained security in the courtyard. This meant splitting their two-person team, which violated standard operating procedures, but the intelligence value of the mission made the risk acceptable. Sarah had built her reputation on making sound tactical decisions under pressure. The narrow stairway was constructed of the same concrete as the rest of the building, and each step created small echoes despite Sarah's careful movement. She could feel her heart rate increasing as she climbed higher, knowing that each step took her further from supporting fire if she encountered hostile forces. At the top of the stairs, Sarah found herself on a flat roof with a low concrete wall around the perimeter. The view provided an excellent vantage point over the surrounding neighborhood, confirming her suspicion that this location would be valuable for insurgent operations. She could see coalition vehicle routes and potential ambush positions throughout the area. As she began photographing the tactical features with her digital camera, Sarah noticed fresh cigarette butts and empty food containers near one corner of the roof. The evidence suggested recent occupation by several people, probably within the last 24 hours. This intelligence would be valuable for planning future operations in the area. She was examining what appeared to be communication equipment hidden under a tarp when she heard Johnson's urgent voice on her radio. "Sergeant Martinez, we have movement in the adjacent building, multiple personnel, possibly armed. Request immediate guidance." Sarah quickly evaluated her options. They could withdraw immediately and call for backup, or they could attempt to gather more intelligence while maintaining their current position. The decision would affect not only their immediate safety but also the success of ongoing operations in the region. Before she could respond to Johnson, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of multiple weapons being charged simultaneously. The metallic clicking came from several directions, indicating they were surrounded by an unknown number of insurgents. Her training kicked in automatically as she prepared for what was about to become a deadly firefight. The first shots came from the building across the street, forcing Sarah to dive behind the low concrete wall on the roof. The round struck the wall inches from her position, sending fragments of concrete flying through the air. She could hear Johnson returning fire from the courtyard below while reporting their situation to command. Sarah quickly assessed her tactical position and realized she was trapped on the rooftop with limited cover and no clear escape route. The insurgents had obviously planned this ambush carefully, waiting until the American soldiers were in the most vulnerable position possible before initiating contact. As she prepared to return fire, Sarah could hear additional insurgent forces moving into position around the compound. The sound of running feet, shouted commands in Arabic, and weapons being moved indicated that this was a significant enemy force, much larger than her small reconnaissance team could handle alone. She knew that her survival, and the survival of her team, would depend on her ability to maintain effective fire superiority until coalition reinforcements could arrive. The radio traffic indicated that help was on the way, but it would take at least 20 minutes for the nearest units to reach their position. 20 minutes in a firefight was an eternity, especially when facing overwhelming enemy numbers from a disadvantaged position. Sarah checked her ammunition supply and prepared for what would be the longest 20 minutes of her life, unaware that her ordeal was just beginning. The intensity of the gunfire escalated rapidly as Sarah found herself pinned down behind the concrete barrier. Enemy rounds whistled overhead while she tried to establish communication with her scattered team members. The insurgents had chosen their ambush site perfectly, creating overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. From her position on the roof, Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different buildings. The insurgents were using a coordinated attack pattern, with some fighters laying down suppressive fire while others attempted to maneuver into better positions. This level of tactical sophistication indicated they were facing experienced combatants, not hastily organized resistance fighters. Johnson's voice crackled through her radio earpiece, strained but professional. "Sergeant Martinez, I count at least 8 hostiles in the courtyard area. They're attempting to breach the main entrance. I'm running low on ammunition and need guidance on whether to hold position or attempt extraction." Sarah quickly calculated their tactical situation. Johnson was trapped in the courtyard with limited cover, while the other team members were presumably fighting for their lives at various positions around the compound perimeter. The enemy had achieved tactical surprise and numerical superiority, 2 crucial advantages in urban combat. She made the difficult decision to maintain their current positions while calling for immediate fire support. "Johnson, hold your position and conserve ammunition. Use single, aimed shots only. Fire support is inbound, but we need to survive the next 15 minutes. As Sarah raised her rifle to engage the nearest enemy position, she felt a sharp impact against her left shoulder that spun her around violently. The first bullet had found its mark, tearing through her body armor and lodging in the muscle tissue beneath her collarbone. The pain was immediate and intense, but adrenaline kept her fighting. She forced herself back into position and returned fire at the building where she had seen the muzzle flash. Her training had prepared her for combat while wounded, and she knew that stopping to treat injuries during active firefight often meant death for everyone involved. The second and third rounds struck within seconds of each other. One bullet grazed her helmet, creating a deep furrow in the Kevlar that came within millimeters of penetrating her skull. The other round struck her right thigh, causing her leg to buckle as she tried to change positions along the rooftop barrier. Sarah realized that the insurgents had positioned a sniper specifically to target her rooftop position. The accuracy and timing of the shots indicated someone with professional military training, possibly a former Iraqi army soldier or foreign fighter with combat experience. Despite her wounds, Sarah continued to return fire while directing her team's defensive efforts through radio communications. She could hear the distinctive sound of American M4 rifles mixed with the sharper reports of AK-47s, indicating that her Marines were still fighting effectively despite being outnumbered. The fourth bullet struck her ceramic body armor plate directly over her heart, cracking the protective material but not penetrating completely. The impact felt like being hit with a sledgehammer, knocking the wind from her lungs and causing her to temporarily lose consciousness. When Sarah regained awareness several seconds later, she found herself lying behind the concrete barrier with blood pooling beneath her wounded shoulder and leg. The firefight continued around her, but she struggled to focus her vision and coordinate her movements. The accumulated trauma was beginning to affect her combat effectiveness. She forced herself to key her radio microphone and provide a status update to command. "Base, this is Recon Alpha Actual. We are heavily engaged by superior enemy forces. I have multiple gunshot wounds but am still operational. Request immediate close air support and medical evacuation." The response from command was immediate and reassuring. "Recon Alpha Actual, close air support is 3 minutes out. Medical evacuation helicopter is standing by at forward operating base. Maintain your position and mark your location with infrared strobe." Sarah reached for the infrared strobe light attached to her equipment vest, but movement caused excruciating pain in her shoulder wound. She realized that the bullet had probably damaged nerves and blood vessels, making precise motor control difficult. Everything seemed to require tremendous effort. The fifth and sixth bullets arrived almost simultaneously. One round struck her right arm just above the elbow, while the other hit her left leg below the knee. The insurgent sniper was systematically targeting her extremities, possibly trying to incapacitate her rather than kill her immediately. Sarah's tactical awareness began to fade as shock and blood loss took their toll. She could still hear the firefight continuing around the compound, but the sounds seemed distant and disconnected. Her rifle felt impossibly heavy, and she struggled to maintain her grip on the weapon. Through sheer determination, she managed to activate her infrared strobe light and place it in a visible position on the rooftop. The device would allow incoming aircraft to identify friendly forces and avoid accidentally targeting her position during close air support strikes. The seventh bullet struck her protective vest again, this time penetrating the damaged ceramic plate and entering her chest cavity. Sarah felt a sharp, burning sensation, followed by difficulty breathing. She realized that the round had probably punctured her lung, creating a potentially life-threatening injury. As she struggled to control her breathing and maintain consciousness, Sarah could hear the approaching sound of aircraft engines. The close air support was arriving as promised, but she wondered if it would be in time to prevent the insurgents from overrunning their position. The 8th and 9th rounds hit her almost before she heard the gunfire. One bullet struck her left shoulder, while another hit her right leg. The cumulative effect of her wounds was becoming overwhelming, and Sarah found it increasingly difficult to focus on the tactical situation. Despite her deteriorating condition, she managed to provide target information for the incoming aircraft through her radio. Close air support. This is ground unit marking position with infrared strobe. Enemy positions are in buildings to the north and east of my location. Danger close situation. Friendlies are still in the compound. The pilot's voice was calm and professional. Ground unit, I have visual on your infrared marker. Confirmed enemy positions in adjacent buildings. Beginning gun runs on hostile targets. Keep your heads down. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of the aircraft's cannon system engaging enemy positions. The 30mm rounds were devastating against concrete structures, and she could see pieces of buildings flying through the air as the pilot systematically destroyed insurgent fighting positions. The enemy fire decreased significantly as the insurgents either took cover or were eliminated by the airstrikes. Sarah used this temporary respite to assess her wounds and try to treat the most serious injuries with her limited medical supplies. The 10th bullet struck her while she was attempting to apply a pressure bandage to her chest wound. The round hit her left leg again, causing additional damage to already wounded tissue. Sarah realized that she was losing consciousness more frequently and for longer periods. As the air strikes continued, she could hear Johnson and the other team members beginning to coordinate their extraction from the compound. Their voices sounded relieved but exhausted, indicating that they had survived the initial assault but were probably also wounded. The 11th and final bullet hit Sarah just as she was preparing to move toward the stairway leading down from the roof. The round struck her in the back, entering near her right shoulder blade and exiting through her chest. The impact caused her to collapse completely, unable to maintain consciousness or control her movements. As darkness closed in around her, Sarah could hear the sound of helicopters approaching for medical evacuation. She tried to respond to radio calls, but found that she could no longer speak or move her arms. The last thing she remembered was the sound of American voices calling her name and the feeling of hands checking her wounds. When Sarah finally lost consciousness, she was alone on the rooftop of a building in one of the most dangerous cities in Iraq. Her team believed she was dead. The medical evacuation helicopter had departed with other wounded soldiers, and insurgent forces were regrouping for another assault. Her incredible ordeal of survival was just beginning. The insurgents, believing all American forces had been killed or evacuated, began moving through the compound to collect weapons and intelligence materials. They avoided the rooftop where Sarah lay motionless, assuming she was already dead and would be dealt with later. This mistake would prove crucial to her survival over the next 48 hours. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the first night, her body fighting to survive despite massive blood loss and multiple traumatic injuries. The concrete rooftop was cold against her back, and she could feel her strength ebbing away with each passing hour. Pain had become a constant companion, radiating from 11 different bullet wounds across her body. During her moments of clarity, Sarah could hear insurgent activity in the buildings around the compound. Voices speaking Arabic, the movement of equipment, and occasional bursts of automatic weapons fire in the distance indicated that enemy forces controlled the immediate area. She remained perfectly still, knowing that any movement might reveal that she was still alive. The first major challenge came with the rising sun of the second day. The Iraqi heat was merciless, and dehydration quickly became as dangerous as her bullet wounds. Sarah's lips cracked and her tongue swelled, but she had no access to water. Her body's natural response to trauma had already been complicated by the desert environment. She had managed to fashion crude pressure bandages from strips of her uniform, but several wounds continued to seep blood slowly. The bullet that had punctured her lung made breathing difficult, and she could taste blood in her mouth. Every breath required conscious effort. And she knew that infection was becoming a serious threat. Around midday of the first day, Sarah heard insurgents climbing the stairs to the rooftop. She forced herself to remain completely motionless, controlling even her breathing to simulate death. 3 men walked within feet of her position, speaking quietly in Arabic while surveying the surrounding area for coalition forces. One of the insurgents kicked at some debris near Sarah's feet, and she felt concrete fragments strike her legs. The men seemed to be using the rooftop as an observation post, just as she had intended to do during her original reconnaissance mission. The irony was not lost on her, even in her weakened state. After what felt like hours, the insurgents left the rooftop, apparently satisfied that she posed no threat. Sarah waited until she could no longer hear their voices before allowing herself to breathe normally again. The effort of remaining motionless had exhausted her limited energy reserves, but it had kept her alive. As the second night approached, Sarah began to experience hallucinations brought on by blood loss, dehydration, and shock. She imagined conversations with her family back home in Arizona, relived memories from her childhood, and sometimes believed she could hear her drill instructors from Marine Corps boot camp shouting encouragement. The hallucinations were both a blessing and a curse. They provided psychological escape from her desperate situation, but they also made it difficult to distinguish between real threats and imaginary ones. Several times during the night, Sarah prepared to defend herself against enemies that existed only in her mind. By the morning of the second day, Sarah's condition had deteriorated significantly. Her wounds showed signs of infection, her fever was rising, and she was becoming increasingly disoriented. She knew that without medical attention soon, she would not survive another day in the desert heat. Despite her condition, Sarah's military training continued to influence her behavior. She maintained operational security by remaining hidden, conserved her energy for essential functions, and continuously assessed her tactical situation. These automatic responses, drilled into her through years of military service, were keeping her alive when conscious decision-making became impossible. During the afternoon of the second day, Sarah heard the distant sound of American helicopters conducting search operations. The aircraft were too far away to see her position, but their presence gave her hope that coalition forces were still looking for missing personnel from her unit. She tried to signal the helicopters using the reflective surface of her dog tags, but her weakened arms could barely lift the metal identification tags into the sunlight. The aircraft passed without detecting her position, leaving Sarah feeling more isolated and desperate than before. That evening, as Sarah slipped in and out of consciousness, she began to hear a different type of aircraft overhead. The sound was lower and more sustained than the helicopters, suggesting fixed-wing aircraft conducting surveillance or reconnaissance missions. These flights continued throughout the night, giving her hope that search efforts were intensifying. On the morning of the third day, Sarah awoke to the sound of small arms fire much closer than before. Through her fevered haze, she could distinguish the sharp reports of American M4 rifles from the deeper sounds of insurgent AK-47s. Coalition forces were fighting their way into the area, probably following intelligence leads about her missing reconnaissance team. The firefight grew in intensity as American forces encountered organized insurgent resistance throughout the neighborhood. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of Bradley fighting vehicles engaging targets with their 25mm cannon systems, indicating that a significant operation was underway. As the battle moved closer to her compound, Sarah summoned her remaining strength to prepare for potential rescue or final combat. She checked her sidearm and found that she had 3 rounds remaining in her pistol. If insurgents discovered her position before American forces arrived, she was determined to account for herself as a Marine. The sound of American voices speaking English reached her ears around midday of the 3rd day. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper due to dehydration and her punctured lung. She managed to tap her pistol against the concrete barrier, creating a faint metallic sound that might attract attention. The voices grew closer, and Sarah could make out the tactical communications of a special operations unit conducting a detailed search of the compound. The professionalism and precision in their movements indicated that these were elite soldiers, probably Navy SEALs or Army Rangers, specifically tasked with finding missing personnel. "Building clear on the 1st floor, moving to 2nd level," came a voice from the stairway below her position. Sarah used all her remaining strength to tap her pistol against the concrete 3 times, the universal signal for friendly forces in distress. The footsteps on the stairs stopped immediately, followed by urgent whispers as the soldiers processed the unexpected sound. Sarah heard weapons being readied and tactical positions being adjusted as the team prepared to investigate the rooftop area. "Possible survivor on the roof. Approach with caution," commanded a voice that carried the authority of long combat experience. Sarah could hear multiple personnel moving carefully up the stairs, their equipment creating subtle sounds that indicated heavily armed and experienced operators. When the first soldier appeared at the top of the stairway, Sarah tried to identify herself as a friendly casualty, but could only manage weak hand gestures. The SEAL immediately recognized her as an American service member and called for medical support while maintaining security around her position. "We have a survivor! Female Marine, multiple gunshot wounds, critically wounded but alive. Need immediate medical evacuation." The SEAL's voice carried amazement that anyone could have survived such extensive injuries for so long in enemy territory. As the Navy SEAL medic began emergency treatment on her wounds, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that she might survive her ordeal. The medical attention was professional and immediate, with the team using advanced battlefield medicine techniques to stabilize her condition for transport. The helicopter evacuation was swift and efficient, with Sarah being transferred to a forward medical facility within 30 minutes of being found. As the aircraft lifted off from the compound, she could see the neighborhood where she had spent 2 days fighting for survival, looking peaceful and ordinary from above. During the flight to the hospital, Sarah learned that her team members had all survived the initial firefight, but had been forced to withdraw when they believed she was dead. The decision to launch a recovery operation had been based on intelligence indicating that enemy forces might be using her compound for continued operations. The SEAL team leader later told investigators that finding Sarah alive after 2 days was unprecedented in his experience. Her survival was attributed to her military training, physical conditioning, and extraordinary determination to live. The 11 bullet wounds she had sustained would normally have been fatal within hours. Sarah's recovery took months of medical treatment and rehabilitation, but she eventually returned to active duty with her Marine unit. Her experience in Fallujah became a case study in survival training and battlefield medicine, helping to save other lives in future combat operations. The compound where Sarah had been found was later destroyed in a controlled demolition, eliminating its value as an insurgent observation post. The rooftop where she had spent 2 days clinging to life was reduced to rubble, but her story of survival continued to inspire Marines and other service members facing impossible odds in combat zones around the world.